Hello, everybody. This is Melissa from Epic. I am Epic, and I am here to introduce our next installment of Ask a Pro, the Playwrights Edition. And this is for Mr. Smith's drama students. We're very excited to have 5 professional playwrights with us today. We have Kate, Claro, Infiniso, Judy, and Jim, and they're going to introduce themselves to you. And what I'd like them to do to introduce themselves to you is what I'd like you to do is start out by just saying your whole name, introduce maybe a play that you most recently wrote or that you want to highlight in some way, what you're working on right now. And you can either answer Rosalie's question, what do you find most interesting about playwriting, or Yannabelle's question, why is playwriting an important skill, as part of your intro, okay? So let's start with Claro.
I think I was muted. Sorry about that. My name is Claro de los Reyes. Let's see. I am a playwright, sort of based here in New York City, Brooklyn, New York. It's something I worked on that I want to mention because I think it's timely, was actually something I was working with Epic called The Battle of Easton. And it's still something in progress, and it sort of deals with Asian American experience during some trying times, gentrification. And something I'm working on now is an experimental play called Mongoloida's Casa de Pan, and it's going to be in actually a virtual festival in Manila, where I was from originally. And it's going to take on this Playwrights Festival that's going to be put online for the first time. So that's kind of an interesting experience that I'm in rehearsal virtually across time zones, but also seeing what a digital platform can do to a play. Okay, so responding to the question, what I find engaging about playwriting, was that the question?
Yeah, interesting, engaging, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, the ability to craft realities and stories is always something that attracted me. I think, stories play a great role because I feel that stories is what people remember in the end, and it's also how people share memories. And so stories can play a really great part right now because it can be used to provide levity, tap into people's imagination, or it could also be used to advocate for change.
Wonderful, thanks, Claro. Next up, Kate.
My name is Kate Fedora. I'm a playwright and a television writer. A thing that I wrote that I'll highlight, which was actually many, many years ago, but the first play that I ever wrote was commissioned by Epic, A Leap of Faith, since I hadn't written a play before. Ron Russell directed it. Melissa Friedman and Jim Wallert were in it. And I mention it now partly because it's connected to Epic, but partly because I was terrified writing that thing. I mean, terrified. Like, Melissa and Ron used to have to come over and literally hold my hand at my kitchen table. I felt so lost, and it was so important to me, but I found it so difficult, and that equaled fear. So it seems like talking to young playwrights right now, maybe that's where some of you are, and I just want to tell you that I have been there too, and I can identify, and I am still there often. And then I think the thing that I find the most interesting about playwriting is actually, especially as I do more TV writing, it's constraints. The box that you have to work in, that can't fly off in a helicopter. I mean, they sort of can, if you can suspend your disbelief, but mostly you're working with sort of a limited palette inside a limited space. And I actually find that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that comes out of those constraints, the same way if you were writing a poem and you decided this is going to be a sonnet and I'm going to follow certain rules, those rules actually might inspire you and guide you in some way. I feel that way about playwriting compared to television writing.
Great, and I should note that Kate is writing for the show
The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, yes, for 4 seasons now.
Wonderful. And next up, thank you, Kate. And next up is Infiniso.
Hello, everybody. My name's Mfani Soadafia. And the thing that I last wrote was a play called Adia and Clora Snatched Joy. And that is the 9th play in my UFOT play cycle. I'm in the middle of writing a 9-play cycle. You should know that the 9 plays are not done. I just ended up writing the last one because I needed to know where I needed to end up so I could write the middle. But 6 of them are completed as of now. So yeah, that's the one I want to share that I wrote because it was a big thing to get to the end, even though I'm not at the end. And I also write for TV. I'm currently on the show Little America, but I've written for 13 Reasons Why and Pachinko. And I also have just finished writing a big old thing, a movie. So I now dabbled into movie writing. And now I'm going to take a look at that question. Why is playwriting an important skill? For me, it was really important to be able to like write different kinds of people down and really dive into who those people were. And there was something about writing a play that felt like I'd never seen African people on like stages before. And that's what I primarily write. And I was always going to these plays and never seeing my own. So for me, it was just an important skill so that I could write down humans that I wanted to see. And that felt really important to me. And then to have other people come in and see the human beings that I loved and have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. I think some of our students are pretty big fans of 13 Reasons Why, so that they're going to have a moment on that. Yes, I'm guessing, right, students? Yes. Okay. I'm talking to no one right now, but they will hear me eventually. Oh, next is Jim. James Wallert.
Hi, I'm Jim Wallert. I'm an actor, playwright, a director. I'm also, along with Melissa Friedman, one of the co-artistic directors of Epic Theater Ensemble. I wrote the play The Winning Side, which I think some of you guys saw a couple years ago, play about Werner von Braun and the ethics of space exploration. Right now I'm working on an adaptation of Sophocles' play Oedipus, which I'm sort of shocked at how timely it is right now. It's a play about a community that thinks they're safe behind a wall, but they get visited by an invisible plague. And they're, because of a lack of moral leadership from one of their previous leaders, and the only way to deal with it is the plague sort of exposes all of these really uncomfortable truths that people aren't willing to acknowledge and see. So crazy timely. What is something I think is interesting about playwriting? I had a couple of years ago, I had a high school student during a push-up conversation ask me, is it a playwright's job to fracture linear time in order to understand history? And after my jaw picked up off the floor, I said, yeah, I think that's right. Thank you for telling me what my job is. And so I've really, that has really stuck with me, that idea that playwrights sort of manipulate time, mess around with time a little bit in order to really understand where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going.
Awesome, thank you, Jim. And Judy.
Wow. You guys, this is amazing. It's a lot to follow. My name is Judy Tate, and I'm a playwright, and I've written a lot of television. I was in television for about 10 years. And, but I'm the artistic director of 2 theater companies. And one is called the American Slavery Project. And we are a theatrical response to revisionism in this country's conversations around enslavement and its aftermath, Jim Crow. And we have a piece that moves around, goes to schools, for which Infamiso has written, based on the burials at the African burial grounds. 1 year after we'd been doing it, a couple of years, I said, Infamiso, we need they're monologues about how people lived during enslavement in New York at that time. And I said, you know, if we were taken, there's people missing us across the water. Would you please write that monologue? And so we have a version of the show called Echoes with Insamisa's work in it. The last thing I've written, in fact, was a play called In the Parlor that takes place in 1913 in the Jim Crow era. However, it's a story that many people do not know about the negotiation between Mary Church Terrell, look her up, African-American, brilliant woman, brilliant educator.
She went to Oberlin.
Ah, yes.
Yes, it was famous where I went to college, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's her negotiation with the famous suffragette Alice Paul to allow Black women to march in the very first Women's March in 1913, which included a Black Greek association, Delta Sigma Theta. 22 AKAs rose up and said, we want to be more activists and join that march. So that's the last thing that I wrote. And we were to produce it this year, but there's not much theater happening. So we're working right now on doing it as a radio play with visuals that go back and forth between some of the performances we've had and also the historical photographs of, you know, a lot of people don't know that African-American women have been educated for a very long time. And Mary Church Terrell spoke 4 languages, you know, gave speeches in French, German, English. I mean, it's just amazing. What else? And I also run a company for justice involved young men, and I've helped them write plays for the last since 2012 every summer. So that's kind of fun. And the thing I find most interesting about playwriting, you know, so many things, but the idea that you can, as Jim Wallert was quoting his student, that you can fracture time, that you can explore an era and still hold on to the values you hold dear today and show the difference between how people thought. You know, if you went back 2,000 years in time and met people who lived 2,000 years ago, they'd probably be less familiar than a Martian, right? Because of the way our thinking evolved. So I think that exploring history and exploring relationships in different times is really, really a unique thing that we can do. Not that you can't do that in film and television, but I love that on stage because, you know, because everything sort of isn't given to you. You have to really use your imagination and staging in a way that, you know, well, like Kate was saying, well, you can bring in a helicopter and TV, you got the hell, you know. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that you have an opportunity to explore relationships. I don't like we're just an era to tell a historical story, but I really like to explore the relationships that people had in that era. And I think it's an important skill, I do, because it allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to explore their point of view and give humanity to people that you wouldn't necessarily agree with. You know, you have to write the nemesis, the antagonist, and you've got to write them fully. And you may not agree with them, but you have to understand them. And I think that that's an important skill to have in life.
Thank you, Judy. Awesome, wonderful. So here are our 5 amazing playwrights. I thought we would now open up I'm going to ask you like kind of 3 questions at once, and you can take any of these questions. They all have to do with how do you start. So Kiana asks, how do you start writing, and do you think that it has to have one message? Anita says, what is the first hook to get a play started? Do you usually start with a character, a theme, or an image? And Amber just basically writes, how do you come up with an interesting story? So how do you start a play? What are your thoughts in response to those questions?
Everyone's silent because it's so hard to start a play.
Everyone's like, is it different for every play, right? But
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what would you think about it in terms of advice for these young playwrights? I mean, what from your experience, your personal experience, what kind of advice would you give a young playwright as they're starting to think about?
I have a quick answer to that, unlike my introduction. The play that you guys workshopped, it started with an image.
Mm-hmm.
I saw somebody hanging.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know why they were hanging. A woman came along. I didn't know who she was to the person. And I just thought, and it raised questions. So I wrote the play to answer all the questions and subsequent questions that raised.
Yeah, and I would say as a piece of really practical advice, actually write those questions down as they come to you and move through and answer them. I think writing down questions is a really good way of sort of letting yourself move forward and keep thinking, even if you don't know the answers to everything yet. Instead of getting blocked, write the question down, let your subconscious stew on it, So I had the same thing with a play that I wrote called 100 Saints You Should Know, where I saw the shape of it, that there was sort of one person going this way and one person going this way, and that the play took place where they met in the middle. So, and it was about one person wanting to join the church and one person wanting to leave the church. And the play took place in this center part. But that was all I knew, was that I saw this shape.
Yes.
I also write from questions. And I've noticed that as I go, I start streamlining this is just for me. So if this doesn't work for you, don't do it. But I'm streamlining the questions down. I had one play called Run Boy Run, where it was a little autobiographical. And it was like, how do I love my father? Which is a huge question for me. And then that was almost too big for my mind to handle. So then I asked other questions inside that question, like, what happened to my father? Where was my father? What made my father? What was his history? And then I kept going down the question path until I was like, oh, I think the thing that might be important for me to tackle in my play is when does mental illness become a tradition? Because I thought illness was just, he came from war. And he wasn't maybe always ill. And so that asking of questions and refining, even though it was tedious, helps me write plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everyone in terms of the power of a question as a prompting a play's beginning. I mean, but I think for me, my experience has been sometimes the question takes different forms. Like sometimes the questions is actually a specific moment or a visual that will then sort of provoke questions. Say a lot of my characters tend to be of mixed race, and I tackle colorism quite a bit in my work. So I'm super interested in seeing a physical body with an unexpected accent from an American lens, right? So that's like that. An Afro-Asian characters tend to be a big part of my work, and having someone who has East Asian features from Jamaica is something that I love. Would pose questions based on sort of where the audience comes from, and so it's whether it's like a cerebral literal question or even a visual that I think would pose sort of problems or would take aback an audience, right? Just by seeing a moment happen or an individual just being.
Yeah, I totally agree with everybody in terms of like starting from a place of questions that are really interesting and compelling to you. I asked this question to a playwright years ago before I had written a play, and the advice that I got from him was wait as long as possible before you start writing a play, and I found that that's been really helpful to me actually, in terms of just like reading as much as I can about the thing, sort of immersing myself in these questions, thinking about it, really starting to think about the structure, the characters, the ideas, the questions, and kind of delaying as long as I can until I feel like I can't possibly wait any longer. I need to get this stuff out on the page. And that sort of helps give me a little burst to kind of get it out and get as much of it out there as possible. So it sort of helps a little bit with, I think when you have that kind of momentum it seems like it for me, keeps me from getting stuck, at least as quickly or as early as I might otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. The sort of it seems like all of you have talked about kind of the prep work, whether it's asking questions or finding an image that guides you, really thinking about what do you need to do before you start writing. So then once you start writing, they have a bunch of questions, as you may have predicted, because this I'm sure has affected all of you. What do you do? Like Jeremy asked, what do you do when you get stuck or confused? Do you have any go-to strategies? And Tyrese asks, how do you stay motivated while writing? So I think this might have to do with writer's block, right? This question of what do you do when you get stuck, and what are your strategies, when you get stuck? And for these students, putting it away for 3 or 4 months and then coming back to it isn't really one of the options because they have an assignment due, right? So do you have any strategies that are maybe a little bit more aligned with things where you have a deadline where you have to get the thing in, So yeah. Who wants to address that one, that nugget?
I mean, it doesn't sound very highfalutin. No, go ahead.
I will say that what I'm about to tell you sometimes stresses me out to do, but as somebody who's got a lot of deadlines, I find that it is helpful for me when I'm stuck in, say, like structure or stuck in something, for me to like actually get really, really local and narrow and small and go back to character. Go just like spend like 10, 15 minutes going, who are my characters, and sinking into them again for a second. Because sometimes I notice that when I'm most stuck, it is because I'm actually 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 minutes, whatever, ahead of my character. So I've sort of left them for a while, which means going back to them and sinking in, and maybe not even worrying about the pen for 15 minutes, but going, if my character's name is Gertrude, what is Gertrude feeling right now? What would she say? And just sitting with her for a second helps me unlock a little bit.
Yeah.
I was going to say take a walk, which sounds pretty basic, but is one of the great tricks of the writing life. Take a walk, take a run without music, without anything in your ears, anything in your head. Or if it's more your style, take a nap, take a shower, put a question in your head, and then take your body somewhere else and let the question work through your brain without you even necessarily being aware of it. And then I also think, we get taught in school to write really linearly, to lay out an argument step by step by step. And for me, giving myself permission to really jump around and say, I don't know that right now, but I have a feeling about this other scene that I know comes later. I don't even know where it fits in yet, but I'm going to work on that for a little while. You don't have to work through from beginning to end in a really structured way. You can jump around. You don't have to even know where you are. If you're writing something, it will move you forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add to it, yeah, I feel like trying to knowing yourself a lot and sort of how you achieve like a flow state is always kind of good to know. And I think that kind of evolves over time, when what you become and sort of tracking your habits, but also sort of seeing the writing process, especially if you have a deadline, kind of like other disciplines. I'm thinking like ballet or a musician that would always go back to, the bar or their scales, and, how do you identify the scales that work for you? Like sometimes I have these like kind of a log of different activities, like, oh, if I'm stuck, I'll just spend time doing a character bio again, or some of these playwriting exercises I learned from previous mentors. And sometimes that helps because I feel like the activity kind of breeds activity in the same way that, again, if you're a guitarist and you go back to doing scales, then, you know, you'll sharpen up the tools and maybe it'll help you write a song later that day. So going back to the basics, kind of similar to what Faniso was saying, but making sure that you're identifying, you know, which ones have worked for you and using that as a back pocket tool if things get kind of stuck.
Wonderful. The time has flown. So I have one last question that's kind of a closing out thing. If you think about, is there anything that you would like to offer as advice in terms of the writing of their plays? One piece of advice that a playwright told me, playwright Vern Thiessen told me years ago, which is just kind of go in late, get out early. That idea of you don't have to necessarily start with a knock at the door. You can cut to a moment later in the scene, and you don't have to end with a trailing off, right? And I was like, oh, that's really helpful. Is there something like a go-to piece of advice that has been helpful to you from a teacher or mentor, or something that you live by when you're writing in terms of technique that you want to share as a piece of parting advice to our students as they write their short plays for their project for Mr. Smith? That's a big question. So
Yeah.
we have very thoughtful people here. Let me take a moment. Yeah.
I liked learning. I was learning to teach young people to write plays from Daniel Sklar years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to say, let your characters lead. Allow them to tell you where they're going. They're the ones that have the wants, and they have to do stuff to get the thing that they want. So let them lead. And then later, once I had let them lead, if they were going off in the wrong direction, I would have to shepherd them back. So let them lead, but don't be unwilling to shepherd them back.
Awesome.
I two things come to mind for me. One is I always think about voices in the sense that if there are lines in your script that you could easily reverse and have another character say, right? Like if you could in a rehearsal suddenly say like, you know what, you're right. You know, this character has to go out and take the garbage out. So we'll have this character say this, you know, convey this piece of information. If there are lines that can be switched back and forth without anybody noticing, that's a signal that you might want to hone in on voice a bit more. But like, I feel like you want to be able to take all the names off and still know who's talking and why they're talking. So that can be a good exercise for voice. And then I took a class with a playwright named Karen Hartman, who had us do this exercise where she sat us down with our scripts and she gave us a highlighter. And she said, I want you to just read through your script and highlight everything that sings to you, highlight everything that you love, highlight every place where you feel like things are rolling along, highlight everything where you think, I don't even know how I came up with that. So we took half an hour and we went through and we did this to our scripts. And then she looked at us and she said, okay, your assignment is to make the rest of your play as good as those parts, which was funny because partly you feel like, well, if I knew how to do that, I would have done it already. But it actually was also really very helpful to me. First of all, to identify the things that you love and give yourself praise for them. But secondly, to think about sort of bringing every moment of your play up to not a level of quality, but a level of something that matters to you, a heightened sense, and thinking about places where things dip and raising them, if that makes any sense.
That's awesome. I love that exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one more concrete piece of advice just from having read so many high school plays, because I work with high school people a lot. Give one line to each idea. If you've got a chunk of text with 5 or 6 ideas, and then the next person has to answer the first one, we've forgotten what that is. So break up those giant chunks of text and have them make this one argument and the person answer it. And then they make the second part of the argument And the person answers that, and then the third. And then if you have to have a monologue, it's an expansion of one full idea. So don't just put all your ideas into one gigantic chunk of text.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah, so this is not, I have nothing skill-based to give you. I mean, I probably do, but I don't have it right now in my heart. As much as I got, like, when I was writing one play called Her Portmanteau, one of the characters is so mean. Her name is Zini Abasi, and she just delighted me. Like, writing her made me cackle out loud. I was like, how mean can this girl be? All within a framework. So I'm not just writing means for means sake, but I was doing it towards an end going, she's hurting a lot. But what I want to offer is that your characters can delight you. And sometimes for me, I'm chasing that feeling that I get when a character who is also like a little part of me is just running a little wild. I like it. I will end up like laughing and or crying and or raging while I'm writing. And when those feelings happen, I'm like, ooh, I'm onto something and can't nobody tell me it's wrong.
God, I love that play too. Oh my God, it's so good. Yeah. And does anyone else have anything they want to say before Jim, do you want to offer any advice to the young ones?
I mean, I think in a lot of our programs, we do lessons on subtext, sort of talking about what's underneath the words, and that idea that, you know, in life and in plays, a lot of times people don't just come right out and say the thing they want. They say the thing that will either get them what they want, or they say the thing that is safer than coming right out and saying what they want. And so sometimes thinking, like Judy was saying, as someone who's read a lot of student plays, I think sometimes if you find yourself a lot of times over the course of several lines, your character's constantly coming out and saying exactly what's on their mind and exactly what they want, you might want to reconsider the obstacle to those characters, like what might make it more difficult for them to just come out and say their needs, and readjust those lines, thinking about making the text the subtext, and what might they say to try to get at those thoughts and needs and ambitions and wants and desires.
Yeah, and I'll just share a quick sort of pointer. And this wasn't the exact words, but just remember hearing this once from an instructor saying, you know, protect your vision and you know, work hard to protect the vision and the initial impulse of the need to write the play, but also don't keep it from the world, right? I think sometimes if you're too fragile or you get to a point where you are trying to look for perfection right off the bat, you can feel stymied from moving forward. So, you know, it is a gift that you're offering to help move forward a conversation. And again, just balancing that need to protect your vision for sure, and the rawness of what you're trying to communicate, but also knowing that if you keep it from the world, then, you know, nothing might move forward. So.
Wonderful. That's amazing advice. I want to remind all of the students in Mr. Smith's class to be sure, this is a message from Mr. Smith, be sure to complete the Ask a Pro Playwrights Edition exit ticket to get credit for watching this video. Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.